So hello, welcome back to GoAgainGaming. My name is Az, and welcome to another rambly video about whether wildcards should exist in Flesh and Blood and in Flesh and Blood tournaments and events. Before we go into it, please make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification if you want to be notified and all that good stuff, and check out the links in the description box below on ways you can help support me directly and acquire some cool stuff along the way. Speaking of which, thank you very much to all my patrons who make this possible. Look at all of your beautiful names there. Thank you very much for the continued generosity towards this channel and helping this channel grow. You are the best. Thank you very much. Please consider looking at Patreon. It really does help support the channel. Anyway, this is Nick Kyrgios. Credits to everybody who knows who Nick Kyrgios is. Leave a comment in the section below if you do know who Nick Kyrgios is, because he had a great wild card story. But regardless of that, we're going to go into a few things today. But since the dawn of time, there have always been underdog stories. From David taking down Goliath, from Average Joe's gym taking down the Globo Gym Purple Cobras. People love and gravitate, I think, towards a true underdog story because it does sort of synergize and really sort of relate to a lot of our upbringings. A lot of us weren't overperformers. A lot of us weren't gifted things on a silver platter. We had to struggle with adversity and come out the other end as a character, as a human being, sculpted by that pain and everything. So I think a lot of people do appreciate underdog stories, and hence why Azalea is so popular, hence why there's a whole cult, the Azalea cult, around when she was rubbish as a hero. She's very, very good now, obviously, but before that, there was a huge cult following for Azalea because she was the underdog. She never really did anything. And same with Levia, same with these heroes that just don't have the support. And I think wildcards is also another thing that we're obviously going to get into today, is a great way to really give people chances that might not necessarily have them, as well as really sort of storycraft and help market the events as sort of tennis does, which I'm going to make some comparisons to. But yeah, what is a wild card, first of all? Let me just go through this. There's this cool article which is related to tennis, but I think it's going to touch on a lot of points with what we're going to be speaking about today. So tennis is a very, very extremely difficult sport to break into. You're not drafted by a team if you show any signs of talent. You can't pick to join like a practice squad or anything like that. There's no tryouts for tennis because you're not part of a team. It's just you. It's mano v mano, 1v1. So even if you're like ridiculously good, you might not get anywhere if there's nowhere to go, nowhere to showcase that talent, right? So you do have to start from the absolute bottom of the ladder. And then only when you start doing well in smaller tournaments called the ITF Futures, you can then move up to the next level called ATP Challengers. After doing well in the Challengers, you can then move on to ATPs and Grand Slams, which are obviously the things that are televised on television. And it's really, really hard to make it to the top from the very bottom. And a lot of people do get stuck in the middle of those two things, really. But there is one thing that can really speed up that process and really change people's careers, and that is what a wild card is. So a wild card essentially is like a invitation for someone to participate in a tournament that they would not necessarily get into based on their ranking, or in Flesh and Blood terms, their ELO or XP, or a PTI invitation, right? In Flesh and Blood, I'm not very, versed in the systems of it because it's never really something I've been into. If you gave me a wild card, however, along with other people, for instance, it would be something that we're interested in. But there's a few things we're going to go into. But yeah, wild cards essentially allow someone to play in a tournament that doesn't qualify by it via conventional means. So yeah, I think it's a very, very good way. We'll go into this more in a bit. For people to get involved with the tournaments that might not necessarily be involved, and that creates story, it creates great marketing opportunities, and I think it's a very, very good thing, which we'll get into in a bit. But there's only a certain amount of wild cards you can give on these tennis tournaments. So the selection process normally is for people that are local to the scene where the tournament's being held, Like for instance, if the tournament was in Spain and there was a local sort of Spanish player that was grinding all the time, and that tournament recognised that Spanish player for grinding so much, they could give him a wild card or them a wild card to participate in the Madrid Open, for instance. And that could be a good thing with Flesh and Blood as well, right? If there's a big tournament in Antwerp, obviously there's a calling coming up there. Calling's a bad example because anyone can go into a calling. But if there's a nationals, for instance, and there's people that aren't qualified for it but might want to play, you can sort of give those wild card spots out to people that might have not necessarily qualified for it, and that gives you a bit of a story, a bit of a sort of narrative to latch onto. If you've got a couple of wild cards in the mix, and this wild card has won his first game, he's now progressing this far. Oh wait, he's won his second game, or they've won their second game. What's going to happen now? It gives you this narrative that you can really get behind for people that are local to where the tournament is being held, but might not have necessarily qualified through conventional means. So that's one way. Another way, or another sort of wild card application, is for young and upcoming players. So we've heard a lot of awesome stories about really young folks getting into this Flesh and Blood game and giving them the means to, participate in these massive tournaments would be a great marketing and story driver again for, a really, really young player coming in and smashing their first round of Flesh and Blood and all this sort of thing. It could be a great sort of storytelling opportunity there for bringing young players into the game, and maybe even more diverse and colourful characters as well. It could be a great thing, a great marketing strategy to give wild cards to people that might not necessarily have the opportunity to play at the highest level. There's probably a lot of cons to this as well. Probably a lot of leave a comment in the section below as to whether you think it's a good idea or not. But again, spitballing ideas as I've been doing recently on this channel. Another reason for giving out wild cards is in tennis, people returning from injuries. So if someone's been out with an injury of some sort and they've dropped their ranking as a result of losing points for tournaments they haven't played in during the clay season, the grass season, or whatever, they're going to drop points for tournaments that they played in last year because they're not participating this year. So their points are going to drop, and therefore their ranking drops, and so and obviously there's a cascading effect from there. So people that had once qualified for these events can no longer qualify because they're out of the points range, right? So that's another reason why where wild cards are used. Andy Murray, for instance, has been injured a lot throughout his career. He's been given a lot of wild cards into tournaments simply because, obviously, he's been a Grand Slam champion multiple times, but it's just one of those things that these good players that are obviously maybe in Flesh and Blood taken a break and then suddenly want to come back, but they can't because their elo's shot and they can't be asked to sort of grind the PTI events and all that sort of thing. Give them a wild card to get them back in. There's a great story there. It's like, oh, this person's come back to play Flesh and Blood after a hiatus. Does he have what it takes to beat the young upcoming players or the new blood, etc., etc.? Again, it gives us something to latch onto narratively and storytelling wise as well if we are casting it, for instance, or trying to make content on it. It just gives us a story to start with straight away, which is quite good. But yeah, there's a load of good reasons why I think it's good for the game. Leave a comment in the section below as to what you think. But in this sort of situation with Flesh and Blood, wild cards could be given to content creators, for instance, or people that aren't necessarily or don't have the time to go to tournaments and grind events and get PTIs, etc. I mean, I speak to Red Zone Rogue, Kel, a lot, and he doesn't have time to go to tournaments because we're making videos all the time, doing podcasts, making all this stuff on the game. What if Flesh and Blood started giving wild cards to creators in certain areas? That that would be awesome. If we could just get a wild card into an event, we're going to turn up and play, because it creates a story, it creates content, it creates everybody who follows that creator or that personality or whatever they might be out there, Twitter personality, Twitter person, or influencer, whatever you want to call it. It creates a story for them and their audience to really get behind if you give them a wild card. And again, the people that are creating content, the people that have audiences and all that sort of thing, don't necessarily have the time to get to and participate in these high level events. And some could say that the content creators, they're not skilled players either. that's also a valid argument. I'm not gonna speak for others, but I can say for myself, I'm not the best player. I enjoy the game, and I know all the mechanics and stuff, and I reckon I could hold my own against some people in the high level events, but I wouldn't necessarily win. But it's just a cool thing to add to the whole story and narrative, isn't it? Just imagine if Pro Tour Baltimore round 1 was like, oh, we've got GoAgainGaming as, or Red Zone Rogue. He's got the wild card today. He's on the streaming table. We all know him from this channel or that channel or whatever. It's also cross promoting channels and getting people to discover other people, and again, it just raises all things up, I feel. So I might be biased because I'm a content creator, but I think that could be a good thing to do, is look at wildcards for creators, and obviously wildcards for the aforementioned people that are returning from a hiatus, or young players or local players that haven't necessarily got a PTI or an invitation, all those other things that we discussed. But I think content creators should, or could, Alex Norval, look at this, maybe get invitations to these things to create more sort of hype around it, because it's free marketing essentially for someone that might necessarily get the opportunity to do that. But yeah, and also as I said, it's a marketing opportunity. More eyes on the competitive event. Obviously, it's a storytelling thing as well. So I think they're the main points really that I think would be good for getting other people in that aren't necessarily part of the invitation, because I think it'll just make more storytelling and more marketing things possible, more sort of narrative available. But yeah, that's been my rant for today. What do you think? Leave a comment in the section below. Do you think wildcards could be a good addition to the tournament scene? Let us know in the comments below, and we'll do it all over again for another random talk next time. And again, before we close out, thank you very much for all my patrons for making this stuff possible. You are the best. Thank you very much. We'll see you again very soon. Cheers.